Hello and welcome back to FranklinCovey's twice weekly podcast on leadership with Scott Miller. Nearly 7 years and close to 500 interviews where I've been privileged to join you every Tuesday and Friday interviewing some of the world's most influential thought leaders. This podcast is sponsored by FranklinCovey, known to millions as the world's most trusted leadership firm. Founded in part by the iconic author and thought leader Stephen R. Covey, who wrote, amongst many books, the seminal tome, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. My role each week is to tease out some of the insights from people from all walks of life that present themselves on this podcast as journalists, as academics, researchers, CEOs, entrepreneurs, intrapreneurs, wannapreneurs, people that perhaps have some fame or don't, but have dedicated their lives to uncovering their own origin stories, how their genetics and epigenetics has shaped their own leadership journey, their career, their parenting, and generally how to be a more effective person in life. Our guest today is a renowned journalist, James Longman. You, of course, know him as a correspondent on ABC News. He is based in London. Prior to that, had a long and illustrious career as a journalist with many outlets, including the BBC. His most recent release is called The Inherited Mind, a story of family hope and the genetics of mental illness. James Longman, welcome to On Leadership.
Hi, thanks very much for having me.
James, welcome aboard. Your book released recently, and about twice a year, we tend to interview people of consequence that have something to say about mental health, whether it be schizophrenia or emotional health, suicide, ideation, anxiety. We were privileged to interview Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, who you mentioned in your book, and talk about the impact that trauma has in our lives as well. Your story is riveting. For anybody who may not know who you are, they probably now recognize your face or your voice as a global correspondent on ABC News. We're going to talk about some of the insights you share in your combination memoir and sort of journey through the science of the brain. Would you take a couple of minutes and reorient yourselves, maybe professionally and personally, to everybody who is watching and listening today?
Yeah, so I'm the chief international correspondent for ABC News. I cover basically everything that happens outside of the United States. But my focus really a lot of the time in my own life and professionally, I have tried to focus it on issues around significant and enduring mental illness, because my family has quite a kind of a dark experience with it. My father had schizophrenia and he ended his life when I was 9 years old. My uncle, his brother, also had schizophrenia. My grandfather also ended his life. My mother has clinical depression. And I have had my own sort of dealings with depression. I've had 2 major sort of clinical depressive episodes. And all of that sounds very sad and tragic, and I don't want it to be. The book is intended as a hopeful one. So the book is an effort to try to explain what happened to my dad, to find out the truth of what happened, because with these illnesses, there's so much stigma attached to significant, psychotic illness like schizophrenia. And then beyond that, to go and find out from the neuroscientists, the geneticists, the people doing the work, to find out what's actually going on in our bodies.
James, let's start there. You write about your father's passing, an incomprehensible tragedy. The persistence, if you will, the prevalence of mental illness in your family is breathtaking. And you write about this quite remarkably in terms of vulnerability and transparency. What is there to learn? What can you teach those that are listening about the discovery of the history of your father's mental illness and suicide?
Well, I think the main takeaway for me for the book is that people understand that they need to find out the truth of these illnesses, that hiding this stuff, that pretending it's not there, is only going to lead you down a darker and darker path. I mean, I was kept from my father's illness. It was hidden from me until I found out in my mid-20s what had really actually happened. Obviously, no one is going to tell a 9-year-old that their father had schizophrenia and he killed himself. But at no point later in my life did someone sit down with me in a kind of measured way to explain what had really happened. So what goes on in a family is there's tragic events happen, and then there's the story of what happened. And oftentimes the story becomes more powerful than the reality, and it becomes law. And you can kind of imagine things that didn't really go on. And so that just kind of leads you into kind of more and more, I suppose, concern about your own life. And so I really think that the main takeaway is to find out if you think something happened in your family, go after it. I think for me, realizing that what he really went through was incredibly liberating, because it allowed me to detach my own sadnesses from the illness that he had. I knew that schizophrenia and depression are not the same thing, but what the book tries to show is how these separate psychiatric conditions share genetic variants. And then it also tries to show how, whilst we do inherit predispositions for mental illnesses, that's only 2% of our code. The other 98% is epigenetics. It's how those genes activate. And crucially, you do have agency over that 98%. So I think the thing with depression is it can take the feeling of agency away from you. You feel like your fate is predetermined. And what I learn in the book, and what hopefully the reader learns, is that you have the power to change the way your genes basically act. And what's more, most importantly, is you can give that ability to your children, so you can break that cycle.
James, we'll talk more about activating epigenetics in a moment. Let's return to the impetus of what happened in your life to learn more about your father's mental illness, his schizophrenia, the impact it had on you. What were some of the procuring ingredients that gave you the courage, the necessity to delve into this?
I got my first real bout of depression in my late teens and early 20s. And I knew by that point that he had schizophrenia. I didn't know the reality of what actually happened the day he ended his life, but I knew it was schizophrenia. And I also knew that developing schizophrenia in a man, if you show symptoms in your late teens and early 20s, that's when you know. So I had this feeling that this could be it. This could be my dad's illness being reproduced in me. When eventually I came out of that depressive episode, which lasted about 6 months, I realized that I need to find out what had actually happened to my dad, to try to separate it from my own sadness, or to just try and make sense of this genetic link that we might have had. And so really that was what fueled my interest. And the thing with, when someone ends their life, and when, they do it at a time when their children are so young, you then grow up with an idea about your parents, which is not necessarily based in reality. And you imagine them to be all these things, but their suicide is the one kind of defining detail that you have. It's the only fact that I ever had, was that he killed himself. I didn't really know anything else about him. A lot of his actual life, who he was as a man, John Longman, that information really I didn't get, because there was so much secrecy and people just wanted to protect me, but I didn't have it. So the journey of writing the book allowed me to put some actual fact back into his life rather than all my imagination. And it turned him into a 3D person. And it turned him into someone more than his illness as well, because he's been defined by his schizophrenia and his suicide. And yeah, I've written a book about schizophrenia and suicide. But he now, through the readings and the research and the people I met from his life, has become so much more than that. And I think, for me, the book, I really want people to understand that behind all these illnesses are human beings. And I wanted to humanize some of these conditions, because schizophrenia, for example, we're very happy to talk about mental health these days. We're not very keen on talking about mental illness. And I think that is a key distinction we've got to make, that we all have mental health needs because we all have brains. We don't all have mental illnesses, but we may be related to people who do. We will certainly know people who have them. And I think the mental health debate has allowed us to ignore people with significant and enduring mental illnesses, and it makes them scary somehow. And I wanted to show, through talking to people who have these illnesses in the book, that there's nothing further from the truth. There's nothing scary about a person who has schizophrenia.
James, you're not a neuroscientist. You have degrees in Arabic and comparative politics. You are a foreign correspondent. You're a journalist. You're an investigative reporter. But you've learned a lot about the role that genetics and epigenetics plays. What's the difference? And then maybe talk about the role that epigenetics plays in our mental health. And then maybe you could just continue the conversation and talk about what triggers it. What are some of the environmental factors maybe sociological, environmental, that anybody who's riveted right now and is on Amazon buying this book might have a little bit of hope on how to manage, how to contain, how to persevere? Take that anywhere you'd like to go.
So we've all heard about DNA and the code that we get from our parents, but the hardware that we get only accounts for 2%. That we can't do anything about. What you get is what you get. I will likely have inherited code for significant mental illness from my father. But the 98% is the software. It's the how that hardware is activated. It's something that we do have agency over. So you can do things in your life which will help. I suppose. You can do things in your life which will help to motivate those epigenetic processes. And you can do things in your life which will lead to turning down those genetic predispositions for all kinds of illnesses. But in this case, we're talking about mental illness. It's like a dimmer switch. It sits on top of your genetic code, and you can essentially turn it down. And there are things that I do in my life which help generate proteins, which are called sirtuins, and they flood the blood, and they will generate longevity chemicals, which basically keep you disease-free. There's a whole body of science. David Sinclair, I don't know if anyone's listening, has listened to Lifespan. It's a very famous podcast. He talks about this. Now, there are things that you can do in your life to keep yourself safe. There's another great book out at the moment called Make Change That Lasts by Ranjan Chatterjee, and he talks about how there is so much health information out there at the moment. There's so much, there's never been more knowledge. There have never been more health podcasts. There's never been more medical literature. But we've never felt somehow less in control of our own health and our well-being. And we're always looking outside ourselves to find answers for this stuff. And what he says is that know yourself, know what keeps you happy, know what keeps you good and well. And for me, I've developed ways in my life that keep me happy and well. And I believe I am affecting epigenetic change in my body. And therefore, when I have children, I will give them that same ability. So that 2%, yeah, I've got it, and my children will likely have it. But the 98%, I can make a change over, and I have agency. And that's a very freeing concept for someone who has a mental illness, because this feeling of inevitability, the doom loop, the fatalistic kind of mind frame that you have about the world and your place in it, you can blow that up, because what you can actually do is change your entire future with knowledge of your biology.
James, what a valuable reframe. For those that are listening or watching that maybe don't think they have firsthand experience personally with any psychotic episodes or schizophrenia or deep depression, what would you like them to know about what it is, what the experience is like to suffer from that? To the extent you have some personal experience with it, what would you say to those leaders, to those parents, those neighbors, to relatives that don't understand? What's it like, and how can they be helpful as part of your community, as part of someone's community?
Often, I think the concept, people think about schizophrenia, they might think about it as being a multiple personality disorder, that people are somehow not themselves when they're dealing with schizophrenia, and therefore you can treat the ill person differently to how you might treat them when they're well. That's really unhealthy. They're always themselves. They're never not the person they are. They're dealing with something which is very scary because it turns their mind against them. What I learned with my father was that there were so many people in his life who thought they knew what was best for him. And there were people in his life who were helping him live in the world. And it was a push and pull between the people who wanted to fix him and the people who just wanted to help him live. And if you can be the person who helps someone live with their illness, rather than try and figure out ways to fix them, that will, I think, lead to a more successful outcome. You know, I met his carers. I had 140 pages of his medical records that were released to me from the National Health Service here in Britain, the state-funded health service. It listed his medications, his psychiatric care that he got, the social workers that he worked with. So I tracked these people down, and there are some very real moments where I meet these people who looked after my dad. And it gave me such hope to know that there are people working in mental illness provision who are walking alongside people with these sicknesses and are not looking to fix them or judge them in any way. The other thing to know is that family is really important for someone who has one of these illnesses. My father was cut off from his family. He was cut off from me. And I think one of my main fears in writing the book was I was going to discover something that I've really, really worried about my whole life, which is that having a family made his illness worse. That having a child actually could have led to his suicide. That he had schizophrenia and it was worsened because he was trying to live in the world normally. And I spoke to and that was something, by the way, that was told to me by my mother and other people in my family. And I spoke to one of his carers. I was able to meet with her, and she said, James, I took your dad down by your school, and we used to sit in the car outside because he said he just wanted to feel like he was near you, he was close to you. There's this overwhelming need for people to be surrounded by family or community, a support system that is no different to the rest of us, right? But people with these illnesses really need it. So to cut them off is devastating. And I was doing an interview the other day in New York, and one of the technicians was there, and he had said to me, "I'm so happy you're doing this book." He said to me quietly, he hadn't said to anyone else. He just said, "James, my son has schizophrenia, and we are at the moment we're paying for him to stay in a hostel, but we don't have much money, and we're kind of running out of money. But he's 21." I don't know what he does in the room, but all I can really do is pay for the room for him to be in there. And what I do is I go to the door and I listen and I talk to him through the door, but I don't know what else I can do. And he said, "Thank you so much for writing this book. I've never told anyone that." I actually relayed that story to the interviewer who was interviewing me. I didn't tell anyone who it was. And then he ran out from behind the camera and was like, "That was me. He was talking about me." And suddenly he sort of told his entire workplace about his son. But it gave him the permission to be honest about what had happened in his life and needing the support. He needs the support in order to kind of support his own son. But what he's doing there is a really good example of just allowing someone to live their life and walk alongside them. He needs a lot of help, and that's a whole nother issue. There's not enough mental health provision in pretty much any developed country at the moment. He can't be expected to support his son on his own. But I think providing community to people who have these illnesses is so important.
James, I mean this very genuinely. Your book is enormously courageous. I think it's going to be a gift to sufferers, parents, loved ones around the world. You have to be very pleased with the reception to it. I'm going to ask you a story about that in a moment. Before I do that, you have reported from some of the most dangerous, traumatic areas in the world, in Chechnya and Ukraine and Syria. Do you ever worry that your chosen profession as a foreign correspondent, seeing and witnessing some of the most incomprehensible traumas in the world, is not healthy for your own predisposed mental challenges? Take that and package it more eloquently in your response.
Look, I mean, people often ask me, why did I end up doing this job? I mean, if I had so much sadness in my life, why am I going around the world documenting it constantly? It's kind of pathological. I look at it a different way. I'm attracted to emotion. I've been surrounded by it my whole life. I had a very kind of turbulent childhood. And I feel like it makes sense for me to be alongside people when they're going through possibly the worst day in their lives. I go to a place and someone is going through something unimaginable. It makes me feel like I have meaning and purpose to be alongside someone when they're dealing with that. Emotion, sadness, yes, feel like home. It feels normal for me. Now, I don't mean that in a morbid way. It's not like I get off on it or anything. I just feel it gives me meaning and it gives me purpose. And I would like to be that person for someone else when they're going through something, because I feel I can understand it. And I think it makes me better at my job. So it's not to say that things don't upset me and affect me, but the experience I've had with my own depressions and the research I've done for this book on how best to deal with some of these mental illnesses leaves me better able to deal with some of this stuff. And spoiler alert, it's talking about it. I mean, that is the number one thing you've got to remember when you're dealing with a significant issue. You've got to share it. You've got to talk to people around you who you love and you respect. And I'm able to do that with my colleagues. But it makes sense to me to be around heightened emotion, and I feel privileged to do it.
What's been the reception of the book? I love the story you talked about, one of your producers in the interview. Who should read the book? First, what's been the reception, and who do you think would benefit most from reading this story that toggles between your own memoir and the science of mental illness?
Look, I mean, the reception has been extraordinary. There are people what you realize is that everyone is touched by this. You don't have to be related to someone who has a significant mental illness, but literally everyone I talk to, after interviews are done, they'll say, "Oh, yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to reading your book. My best friend ended their lives when we were kids," or "My brother is in an institution." I mean, time and time again, people will say it has affected me. So actually, the readership is very broad because everyone could probably point to someone in their lives who they know has dealt with this in a serious way. Suicide affects so many people for all kinds of reasons beyond significant and enduring mental illness. And I think that it's the kind of book for anyone who just wants to make sense of family as well. You know, when there's a suicide, it kills the person, but it injures all of the relationships that remain. And loads of people have issues with their families. We're presented with ideals in the world, ideals of beauty, ideals of youth, and ideals of family. We're told what a good family is and what a bad family is. And I think a lot of people feel self-conscious about if they don't have good relationships in their families. I have a very troubled relationship with my mother, and I'm very honest about it in the book. She writes a chapter in the book about my dad. So I think it's really for anyone who contemplates their place in their family and what it means for who they are today, and you know how they compare to other people around them who they're related to. You know, I hope people find solace in that, and people have been very, very kind, generally about the book.
James, I've asked you a lot about the surrounding people, leaders, colleagues, family members, friends of those who are suffering with mental illness. You're not a psychiatrist. You don't portray yourself as one. You are increasingly a neuroscientist, maybe not by degree, but by information and practice and understanding, right? More than the common person. How do you implement practices, habits, healthy moderation when you find yourself struggling? For those by the millions who are listening today and they themselves can relate to the struggle, anything you do in particular that keeps you on a healthy track?
I'll give you two examples. One of them is explained in the book. A lot of neuroscience around depression focuses on a part of the brain called Brodmann 25. It's actually the part of the brain that Freud talked about because it generates feelings of guilt. And guilt, Freud said, defines people with depression because rather than blaming other people, you blame yourself. So it's self-blame. Brodmann 25, there's all kinds of different exercise, research and scientific experiments are being done on it. But one of them I did was I went into an fMRI and they basically scanned my brain. And I was given all kinds of ways in which I would generate feelings of guilt. I thought to myself, well, this won't work. This is not really science. The doctor said, trust me, the brain can't lie. Make yourself feel guilty. So give yourself scenarios to make yourself feel guilty. So I sort of said to myself, well, I didn't see my grandmother enough in the hospital, or I don't have a good relationship with my mum. Sure enough, Brodmann 25 started firing up. It was overactive, as a person with depression it would be. And there are a whole series of phrases that you're given in the fMRI scanner to try to bring those feelings of guilt down. Again, I didn't feel this was science, but he was like, trust me, again, you can't lie to the brain. There was a dial on the above my head and I could read it. And he goes, just focus on bringing that dial down and you will bring feelings of guilt down with the phrases we give you. And the one phrase that worked 70% of the time was, I forgive myself. It sounded like rubbish. Honestly, I was like, this is not science. This is like a holistic, like gobbledygook. But sure enough, I would lie there and say, I forgive myself, and those feelings of guilt dissipate. And the reason I was explained to me is because there is no rational response to I forgive myself. You can't say yes, but. Because whatever you do, you say, I forgive myself, and there is no reply. I found that very powerful because it basically, he was echoing what friends have said to me all my life, which is don't give yourself such a hard time. Give yourself a break. Don't blame yourself for stuff. it is true. The brain is responding when you say that to yourself. That's the first thing I found to be very powerful. The other was what a therapist said to me a couple of years ago, and I've used it for every single scenario now. When I'm finding myself getting upset and angry about the world, I get quite upset about my mum, right? My mum, I have a difficult relationship with her. And he says, getting upset with your mum is like getting upset with that lamp for not making you dinner. The lamp is never going to make you dinner, but all you're going to do is get more and more upset. But your upset doesn't make the lamp suddenly turn into something out of Beauty and the Beast and make you dinner. It's just never going to do anything other than be a lamp. So you have a choice. You can either continue to get upset and not change the situation, or not get upset and not change the situation. But the result is exactly the same. So think about your mother like a lamp. And I do that now with everything. Someone's annoying me, I'm in the street, someone's getting in my way in a store, they're a lamp. And it really has this amazing ability to just kind of diffuse every situation I'm in. It doesn't help me to get upset when something upsetting happens, because it doesn't change the reality of that thing. And that has really been something that's helped me, and I always tell people that when I can.
Last week, I had the privilege of interviewing Mel Robbins, who has the #1 podcast and book in the world, The Let Them Theory, a lot of similarities there. Send us off with some further insight. I don't know anybody who has a conscience and who is sane that doesn't have some level of anxiety right now if they're even paying attention, whether it has to do with the politics and the vitriol happening in the US, whether it is the trauma and tragedy hour by hour happening in Gaza and in Israel, whether it's the Russians and the Ukrainians, or wherever the hot spot is happening in the world. You know them better than anyone. Do you have any advice or coping techniques that you would send us off with for people who may not be suffering from prescribed or diagnosed mental illness, but who are feeling extremely unsettled and in some cases even apoplectic around society and civility and just, I mean, the polarization? I'm 56. I've never seen it this bad, and I have very little hope it's going to get better, because I think the standard has lowered. We've jumped the shark. It's a new reality. Send us off on some positive hope after my diatribe.
Well, first thing I'd say to people is limit your news intake. You can take bite-sized chunks in the day. You've got to be really, really kind of strict with yourself about it. It's like anything. It's like going to the gym. You know, thinking about going to the gym isn't going to make you fitter. You've actually got to do it. By the same token, thinking about turning the news off isn't helpful. You've actually just got to take bite-sized chunks, first of all. That's not saying you sort of obfuscate and completely kind of give up your civic duty to the world. But like I said, you feeling upset about it, it's not going to change the situation. So be good to yourself. The other thing I always say is that I didn't become a journalist to depress people. I don't do this job in order to kind of spread sadness and gloom. And there is so much happening in the world that should give people hope. And because I really do fundamentally believe that people are good, the most clicked on news item on any given day, on any given website, will not be Gaza, it will not be Ukraine, it will not be the latest decision from the White House. It will be likely a panda somewhere, or it'll be a nice snowman, something like that. Now, that sounds trite, but it's not because we're stupid. It's not because we're idiots. It's because we fundamentally want to be happy. Human beings want to be happy. And by and large, we are good. Humans are good. So as much as the world feels bad, human beings are good, and they all want the same thing, which is to be happy, healthy, and to be part of a community that loves them. That's my message, and I hear it and see it face to face with people all around the world, even in the darkest moments. Some of the people I met after the October 7th attack, the families of those who had come to support those who'd had relatives die, families in Ukraine who've lost everything, people in Syria who lived under decades and decades of brutal oppression. Every single one of them had a story for me to show me that humanity is fundamentally good.
What a kind send-off. James Longman, foreign correspondent for ABC News. Your new book is called The Inherited Mind, A Story of Family Hope and the Genetics of Mental Illness. Sir, thank you for your courage and vulnerability today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we'll see you back here next week for a new conversation on leadership.